Have you ever been lost? How about in a foreign country? What would you do? Well, you'd probably give them a map, and that map would be in English, right? Well, that would work great if you were in England or Australia or even Canada. Heck, even Germany, you can figure out Strasserman Street. But what if you were in a foreign country and that person you gave the map to couldn't read, write, or speak English? Well, that happened to me on my first visit to Hong Kong in 1990. When I was lost, I gave a map to a Chinese man who couldn't read, write, or speak English. There were no Chinese characters, and I sure couldn't read Chinese characters. Well, the purpose of this presentation today is to inform you on the importance of intercultural communication and the difference between the Asian culture and our culture. Now, my name is Daniel David Ellis, and I spent 15 years living and working in Asia after that horrendous event. Now, this may be important because you may want to go to Asia for business or even for a vacation. And if you give a map to somebody, you're going to want to make sure they can read it. So what we'll cover today is the differences between the Asian culture and our culture and how to effectively communicate by understanding those cultures. But before we begin, let's go over what the definition of intercultural communications is. Okay, social psychologist Steve Duck and Dr. David McMahon, communication professor at Mississippi State, they published a book, Communications in Everyday Life. And they define intercultural communications as how different people, different cultural and social structures interact with one another and what difficulties or conflicts they encounter. Now, let me give you a little history about intercultural communications. Well, it's existed since the beginning of history, human history, that is. And in prehistoric times, one tribe would go over and they need to interact with another tribe. Hence, it was taught in anthropology and then psychology and sociology. Over the past 40 years, communication has become a separate department and ICC has been studied. Now, the main theories of intercultural communications were put forth by Dr. Edward Hall and Kurt Holstein, which I'll be discussing later in this presentation. Now, a little bit more about their findings in intercultural communications. Well, it's all about perceptions and experiences. They determine how the world looks, our world looks, and how we interact with that world. But problems arise when our own cultural, verbal, and nonverbal messages are applied to other cultures. So we must adapt. The increased immigration has made cultural adaptation more significant. In other words, the smaller the world gets, we depend more upon each other. Now, as I mentioned, Dr. Edward Hall is a major contributor to ICC. He was an American anthropologist, and he published first theory and actually coined the term proxemics, which means the use of space in nonverbal interpersonal communications. He also pioneered and distinguished cultures based on context and time. So let's go over those. Let's talk about context. Now, there's a low context culture and high context culture. In the low context culture, the message is everything. The primary message is directly expressed in the verbal message. So there's less emphasis on status or relationships. Okay, so what you're saying is direct. Now that occurs here in America and in most Western cultures. Now high context culture is where the total environment is everything. It's the context. So the primary message, it's implied. It's not expressly stated. And here in these cultures, like in China and most Asian cultures, relationships are the key. Status is the key, your social status. Okay, as far as Dr. Hall said on time, we have polychronic culture and monochronic culture. The difference between the two is polychronic culture, time is not linear, it's relaxed. Multiple conversations happen with different people all at the same time. Imagine that. Now, here in these cultures, like in France, Italy, and Greece, promptness is not important. You can go to lunch, and it can be 2 or 3 hours long. Trust me, I've done that. Monochronic cultures, time is linear. It's valuable. Time is money. We've heard that often because US, the UK, and Germany are all monochronic cultures. Our timeliness is to the agenda. And believe me, we don't get more than a 1 hour lunch, do we? Now, Gerd Hofstede, he wrote a book on the culture's consequences in cultures and organizations. Now, he distinguished between individualism and collectivism. Individualism is where the individual identity, the personal goals and accomplishments are over those of the group identity. So your value is based on your own aspirations, your dreams, what you want to accomplish. That's like here in America and in most Western cultures. Now, that's opposed to collectivism, which is where the group identity reigns over the individual identity. Here, the group's goals and accomplishments and their rights are valued as opposed to individual rights. So, in a collective society, your value is based on your place in the system. Now, that happens in China, Japan, and in most Asian cultures. Now, I hope you understand with this presentation the difference between the Asian culture, which is high context, right? It's more collectivism, and it's semi-polychronic. Whereas the USA is a culture that's low context. We value the individual messages. And it's individualistic, where we value an individual's accomplishments over the group. And it's monochronic. Time is money. Now, remember this. If you ever get lost in a foreign country and you give a map to somebody, make sure they can read, write, or speak English. Otherwise, they won't know where you're going. Thank you for your time. Here are my references, and the bibliography is stated at the end of the presentation. Thank you.